Hello everybody, this is Brendan, and today I'm going to be doing a demo to show, to demonstrate how to edit normal maps and ambient occlusion maps within Photoshop. The programs I'm going to be showing today, I'm working within Maya 2016. As well, I'm working within Photoshop CS6, and I have version 1.2 of Crazy Bump. Another program that you could use other than Crazy Bump is Qixels Sweet. Qixels Sweet will do essentially the same type of functions that I use Crazy Bump for, but I have these lined out, these different meshes that we did in class, and there's a couple steps before this video to kind of get the most out of this. On the website, you should see that you're going to want to model your high poly mesh. You can see that right here. You're going to want to model a low poly mesh and have it UV mapped. So we can see that it is UV mapped, in fact. And then as well, using the crease edge function and smooth to mesh preview, that we can actually get a ZBrush ready model. And if you look close on these, you can actually see the topology. Remember, with ZBrush, we want square, kind of even sized squares, and that'll really help us as we subdivide the geometry to get the most out of our sculpting in ZBrush. The bracing edges and the high poly that we made before, like if we see how narrow these are very wide rectangles. They're not going to sculpt. They're going to sculpt really well in one direction, but if we try and sculpt the other way, it's going to look really low resolution. So this is why this third model, I recommend duplicating the low poly model and making this third model for ZBrush is, even though these are still a little bit, these are rectangular, they're not square shapes. They're a lot better than the other ones in the high poly. This is going to be the basis for the asset on the midterm that would be turned in. This would just be, the only reason for this is to basically take the UV map that you made, so we don't have to create one in ZBrush, so that all of our changes will match up, so we can combine it with the transfer maps with other types of normal map passes that we would use. And I think, again, it's really important to think in terms of normal maps being something that you have to combine and edit and get the most out of. So this, for example, is our transfer maps function being used on a low poly. I'll just go ahead and turn this wireframe on shaded off. We can see it's capturing the high poly detail fairly well. And then this is the export out of ZBrush for a quick sculpt. And this is, it's a pretty rough sculpt. I mean, you can see the Clay Tubes brushes and the Dam Standard and some of the other brushes. I'm not really going through and being too clean, but, it kind of works out because of this whole, like, aged stone look that I'm going for at the end. But this is the raw export out of the ZBrush multi-map exporter. So that's another thing that review the module notes, and you should be able to get here and have this map as well, and as well the prior week's module notes on transfer maps. All right, so this is the version after basically going through and combining normal and ambient occlusion, and here's what the Photoshop file looks like. And a lot of people were asking, how I organize my Photoshop files, what it is that I do. And this is actually a pretty involved process. So that's why this video exists, is I'm going to walk through the process of what happens when you're getting maps from different techniques, whether you're using XNormal or the transfer maps function in Maya to bake in high poly detail, whether you're getting normal maps from sculpts in ZBrush, how to kind of put it all together and add in a bit of kind of photo reference and things like that through like Crazy Bump, Qixels Sweet, Substance Painter, and really just combine things together to get the most out of your normal maps. So I've color coded these layers in here actually in the file. So first off, everything is grouped up into a normal map group, an ambient occlusion map, which is shadows. It's just a black and white map. And then a height map, which all I did was make one for a few cracks, but you can do whatever for this, and a photo reference for stone, and then of course my my UV map, my UV snapshot from Maya. So things are organized per prop this way. So basically my turntable, this kind of pedestal, is one prop, and then all the maps are grouped up nice so I can go back and edit if something ends up looking too dark, or if I want to add in a color map, I can combine this. And I really recommend pushing your ambient occlusion, almost kind of like a black and white diffuse map. I really think this is going to help out as you transition into color, to kind of go from black and white to color. It helps be a lot more controlled about the color and make sure that the form is still really popping and there's a lot of contrast, because I think it's easy to make things look flat, and forget about the values when you're going to color right away. All right, so purple is things exported out of Crazy Bump. Orange is things exported out of ZBrush, and green is things exported out of Maya. I do believe that this base layer here, normal from transfer maps, is the only thing exported out of Maya, but this is the tangent space normal map, and that that is the gets that little ring right here on the inside. We can see the detail that's being baked on. The next step is to combine our ZBrush map from the multi-map exporter, and this is the raw map. This is the one, and all I did is I just used the lasso tool to cut out around the head and make a cutout spot, and I put it on overlay layer blend mode, and I duplicated it. I just duplicated this cutout piece, and keeping these on overlay layer blend mode, and I grouped them up. Because really what this is doing, we can see that with each duplicate on overlay, it's actually just making the normals more intense. So this is a great technique to pop out the forms and the details more. It's just to duplicate a specific part of a normal map, keep it on overlay layer blend mode. And then I grouped this up because I wanted to make these additional copies. I wanted to paint in a layer mask. And if we take a look, all I'm doing is just taking an airbrush in here, and I'm just painting on the areas that I want to pop up. I filled this with a black and painted with white, and I just want the ear, kind of the cheekbone, the brow bone, and the nose, and a little bit of this right here to just kind of pop up just some of the form. So that's one way we can edit. The next thing I did from there is I actually take these bottom two layers, and this is where I'm going to save for web. So I'm just saving the normal from ZBrush, the edited one from the multi-map exporter, the normal maps from transfer maps, and I'm just going to export these as a JPEG. And I'm doing this as a JPEG because we're going to go into Crazy Bump with these two layers. And this is how I generate the start of my ambient occlusion. So I kind of build up the normal and the ambient occlusion together in passes. Now keep in mind I did export an ambient occlusion map and a cavity map from ZBrush on this, which I'll be getting to in a second. But I find that I like to export ambient occlusion from as many different programs as possible, because I feel like ambient occlusion is one of those things. Shadows are calculated differently depending on the program, or they have kind of a different look or feel, and sometimes it's nice to combine and see what features stick out with the shadows that build up in the crevices. All right, so this is Crazy Bump. By default, you'll see this view, and I'm going to be showing this because, again, I think editing, there's kind of a back and forth that happens in the editing process with Photoshop, where you're working on your normal map, your ambient occlusion maps, but you're also kind of like feeding back and forth in Crazy Bump, and this is kind of like a back and forth process here. And then as you're making changes, you're applying onto the model. So click this button to begin. We are going to open a normal map from File for Crazy Bump. There it is. Cool, and I'm not going to go over the hotkeys again because I did that in class. This video is mainly going to be about techniques and pipeline. It's not really going to go too much into hotkeys, but again, review the prior module notes for that. If you like this demo video, send me some feedback and let me know, and I can make additional ones that go into more of the basic kind of hotkeys and how to use these programs. Okay, one thing to keep in mind here is make sure that under Preferences, by default, I know that the y-axis is down, and that's going to make things kind of inverted or kind of look weird. So make sure that the y-axis is up by just clicking on the hammer and wrench there, the preferences. And all we're going to do is we're going to go to the occlusion tab here, and I usually export at a crazy bump. I usually drop the power down to like 0 or something really low because I can edit the levels in Photoshop. And I do usually 2 settings. I do one with the enhanced detail higher, and usually it's like 90 plus. And we can see it's starting to get those fine cracks, and really it's helping out to kind of like almost create a drawing around the forms of the model, and this will really help to pop out different details. So what I'll do is I'll do like a 90 plus on enhanced detail, save the map, save occlusion to file. And you can change your images to different types of files here. So I've done PNG, and that's my preferred file format because it's a lot less. It's not lossy like JPEGs are. You can still compress. You still can get, I guess, a lossy file format or compressed file format, but in general, PNGs tend to have less artifacts. Okay, and then the second one, and this is, I kind of do 2 ambient occlusion passes because again, I like to combine in Photoshop, and I'll paint into layer masks and adjust the levels. So I do like a lower enhanced detail, and it may be this particular one. I think I did in the lower mid 70s to kind of like get a wider, softer approach on the shadows. And again, I just exported that out. So let's go back to Photoshop. Let's take a look at the ambient occlusion map. I'm going to turn off a bunch of these layers at this point. Cool. So here's my ambient occlusion. I start with a white background, and then my AO from ZBrush looks like this, and I just painted in the layer mask with some noise here to kind of knock this out and kind of add to the stone texture. And then here's a levels layer here, and what I'm doing is we can see I'm doing a couple things. I'm increasing the shadows by dragging this middle slider up and dragging this output levels up to reduce to clamp the darkest darks in the layer here. And you'll see me do that. A lot of these are either a levels adjustment layer or curves. And what I do is you can take a look at how I'm adjusting them. But basically what I'm going through is, I've named them darken, cavity, brighten, highlights. And every layer has a purpose here. And I'm really thinking about, how I'm using my adjustment layers. So this is the ambient occlusion exported from ZBrush from the multi-map exporter. And while overlay was the mode for normal maps to blend them together, we are going to use multiply for our ambient occlusion, because we're just basically going to stack the color black and grays onto each other. And we can already see that we're starting to get, here was the cavity map from ZBrush without any adjustments, just the cavity map. And then I added on top of, or I use a multiply layer, and it's on top of the ambient occlusion from ZBrush. I darkened the cavities up overall, and then I brightened the highlights, and then I basically just painted out in a mask to just focus on the face, because I really think the cavity map was really, I just wanted to focus and make sure to get the detail on the face right. One thing this demo, I would say that I would continue to add detail and variety onto the rest of the parts. I think it does get a bit flat and plain in its design around the edge, so but for the sake of the demo, we're going to focus on making the face stick out. All right, here is the stuff. This group has the images, the 2 ambient occlusions that I brought in from Crazy Bump. So after exporting both the enhanced detail higher and lower, we can see that here's what's happening with Crazy Bump. And I brighten it up a bit because we're starting to get dark. As we start to go with multiply layers over each other, these grays really add up. And here's the lower, and then I painted in a layer mask here, just to kind of add just to paint away a lot of areas that I didn't like what the lower was doing. I didn't like a lot of the shadowing up here. And again, just brightening it. At this stage too, I think I started to do some overall adjustments in here, like a brighten face layer. I just wanted to kind of pull out the forms. But I'll tell you what, I'm gonna keep this turned off until the end, because I do think that at the end, to segment, you can kind of think of my thinking in terms of the bottom to the top of the layers. So the Photoshop adjustments I usually save for the very end to add in the extra level of finessing on your ambient occlusion. So anyway, this group was what we exported from Crazy Bump. And then the next step was I found a photo online of just some stone texture. I really like a lot of the things going on in this. There's like these layers and almost like stucco or something like that. So I think that it works for kind of like a sculptural look, like if this was some sort of concrete, an older concrete type of stone platform or something like that. So basically, we're going to use Crazy Bump. We're going to take this photo, and you'd find it online, bring it in here, and then you'd save for web again. Just save out a JPEG, and this time we would open in the bottom left, open our photograph from file. And then we choose between the left and the right, whichever one looks right. And I think this one is the one that looks right, has the pock marks. But use your best judgment there. And this one, basically all I did is I went through and I just exported two things, normals and occlusion. Here we go. And for this, I actually turned, with my occlusion maps, I turned my enhanced detail just up really high, just to get kind of a sharper look to the occlusion. And then my normals, I turned my intensity way down on this. I made it really sharp. I turned down I turned down the larger detail and turned up the medium to lower detail on it, just to kind of get more of a noise, more of a stone noise. I don't want big chunks of things sticking out when I bring this back into Photoshop, because at this point, again, we're thinking in broad brush strokes on the bottom to kind of the more minutia. So this texture, this as a normal map, it shouldn't stick out more than this, So we got to make sure, and that's the advantage of doing things in Photoshop this way, is I can always fade my opacity down, or duplicate it if I really want it to be, louder, which we can see this is way too loud. It's taken away from the forms and the other normal maps. And just like I was saying earlier in the semester, is balancing these things out is really important. There's definitely like first read from across the room. If we were in an art gallery, the first thing we'd see some sort of cat face thing. And then as we get closer, we'd start to see, oh, it's stone, stone sculpture. And as we get closer, then we would, start to notice some of the stone detail and things like that. And of course, you can see some rough brush work here, but I call this good enough for a demo, because the purpose of this demo, I can make a ZBrush sculpting demo if you guys want. I'd be happy to do that. But this demo is all about editing the normals in Photoshop here. But anyway, so make sure that this is a lot lower opacity overall, and you should be pretty good. All right, and the next thing I did, so I added that there. I added the noise, and I did again a higher and lower detail for this, as far as for the ambient occlusion. And the last thing I did was I created a height map in Photoshop. So the third way I'm using Crazy Bump. The first way I was using Crazy Bump was to take in normal maps from things like transfer maps and multi-map exporter. And I'd bring this into Crazy Bump, export ambient occlusion. The second thing I was using it for is I would get a photo reference, import a photo into Crazy Bump, and export my normal and my ambient occlusion out of that, and start to really add these things up. And we're really getting dark in the face here, so you'll see me compensate for this with Photoshop in a second. The third way that we're using Crazy Bump is to create a height map, and black will stick in. It's like for cracks, right, and crevices and things, and white will pop out. If you use like a 50% gray here, you can really control things that both pop out and push in. If you use a gray for the base on this, and all the height map is it's just it's a black and white map to inform something like Crazy Bump or Qixels Sweet what your normal map in ambient occlusion is going to look like. You can kind of think of it as painting your own bump map. So basically what we would do, again, going into here, is we'd open a height map from file. And we should be able to, let me go ahead and save this out. There we go. So we should be able to open up our height map, and we can see right away that, let me go ahead and turn off the ambient occlusion, that the cracks are in there. I definitely didn't make it as intense. I know I sharpened it. I reduced the detail again on the bigger stuff to kind of just really sharpen it up, and then exported this plus the occlusion map. But you could do height maps for anything. Height maps are really useful. I find actually one technique, and I'll throw this in here for those of you who are interested. If I were to do, let's say I were to do a height map for like bolts or something instead of cracks. So if you're doing sci-fi, right, this could probably be really handy. As I'd probably start with like a 50% black, and then I could paint in here little circles, little rivets, and on top of that I could use an inner glow by double clicking the layer in the empty area. I could use an inner glow set to multiply and then select my color. So I guess I'm showing this here because height maps, I barely use them for this particular demo, but you can get a lot of really clean, simple details, just little tertiary things to add by using height maps. And then maybe I'll do a drop shadow here, and then soften that up. And this is a really easy way, this black and white image, you know, of making like bolts. So if you have something with a lot of bolts in it, you can just go through and import that into Crazy Bump, and you'll get that kind of rounded effect, as you can imagine. But anyway, all I did for this, kept it simple. Just hand painted a couple cracks to add around the edge, just to add a little bit of variety. It was getting very plain around the edge, and I just wanted to just add just a tiny bit of variety. So here we go. We have cracks in there. The last thing I do with my ambient occlusion now, so in review on my ambient occlusion, we can see all the layers. So I start with, I import my ambient occlusion from ZBrush, my cavity from ZBrush, again from the multi-map exporter. I'm using my levels adjustment layers and my curve adjustment layers to edit those. This is the import from Crazy Bump, the stuff that derived from the normal maps that we exported. So we imported that back in, and we did some more editing. And this is the photo texture, ambient occlusion export. And this is the height map, ambient occlusion export, all from Crazy Bump here, the purple. And last, I do Photoshop adjustments. Now, I'll do these one at a time here. I wanted to make sure, given my UV map, that it was darker towards the bottom of the pedestal, that it was getting darker towards the bottom here. And you can see a little bit in here. The next thing I did is I wanted to kind of darken and brighten with the inside here. And what I'm doing is, again, I'm using layer styles. I use layer styles a lot. But if we double click in the empty area here, we can see this particular, I've set the fill to 0%. So basically, normally this would be like, you know, I just use the marquee selection and basically filled in, kind of like we did with the bolt, really. But this time, what I'm doing is I'm turning the fill to 0, which means that it doesn't show whatever's painted in here, but it will show the effects of the layer styles added on to all the layers underneath. And that's a really handy function. So fill 0%. All right, so Inner shadow, I set this to multiply, and we can see that this is just kind of stacking in here a little bit. And then inner glow, set this to overlay, and I'm adding noise here, and I'm setting it to center. And basically what that's doing is it's just adding in kind of like this was bowed or crowned really in the middle, and just kind of like falling off onto the sides. Then I brighten the face, just to again pull out these forms a little bit. And overall, I thought this was too dark, so I brightened this. And again, what I'm doing here is I'm taking this middle slider and I'm shoving it to the left, and that's a really good way to brighten things up. And then I'm on the output on the bottom part, I'm clamping the lowest value, the black, and I'm saying don't go lower than this value. So it basically doesn't show any values below this, and that's really useful as well. When your ambient occlusion is done, so this is basically what my finished ambient occlusion is like, more or less, I will duplicate this layer, or this group, rather. I will merge the group, and then what I end up doing is I bake it into the normal map. And this is really fun, actually. I think it's really fun. I'm going to do something actually right now to show the difference. So I'm actually going to save this out without the baked in ambient occlusion. No AO bake. Let's go back to Maya. So I am going to break a connection. And if you right click, so I can break my connection on my ambient occlusion. And a lot of you guys ask, what color should I put it through? I put it through the color channel. There is a diffuse channel as well. You can put this through. Basically, it's baked in, so I'm treating it like I'm treating it like it was a diffuse map or color map. But there also is an ambient occlusion channel in a lot of game engines and rendering software, where basically it has a more subtler effect of shadows piling up. And it doesn't look so stark or contrasty. All right, so this normal map, this has ambient occlusion baked in right now. And I kind of like the look of that without the ambient occlusion. I think the ambient occlusion is definitely, it's making it look more weathered and worn and adding character, but maybe you use a very light touch with ambient occlusion. Maybe it's something that you're just baking it in. But let's take a look what happens when I assign basically MTL no AO bake. And I'm going to assign my map. We go through the bump mapping channel for our tangent space normals, remember, and selecting tangent space normals on this arrow. Again, this should be review at this point. All right, where is it? Let us... There we go. Right in front of me. So this is interesting. This is, I find this really, really interesting because this is a normal map without an ambient occlusion bake. And this is a normal map with an ambient occlusion bake. It's actually, it's a really stark difference on this. And how to get this. So we're basically baking the information into here. And this is just one map. This is just our normal map. And that's pretty handy. That's really, really handy to be able to have this much detail, on basically a model that is this much resolution. We have this much textural detail off a normal map, and that's handy. That's what we're going for. So in order to do that, again, we're going to whatever your final ambient occlusion is, duplicate it, merge it, so it's a layer here, and we're going to bring it down. So this is normal layer blend mode, and we're going to choose the darken. We're going to change it to darken layer blend mode. So this is the layer, the shadows AO merged as an ambient occlusion bake into normals and use the darken layer blend mode. And then we're going to lighten this up a lot till it's barely visible. And let me change this back to normal, and maybe this will help. And this is a levels adjustment layer again, so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm doing a couple things with the levels adjustment layer. So this is again our what our normals or what our ambient occlusion looked like. Have our levels adjustment layer here. Is I crank my lights up to where this curve starts to go, where we start to have our lightest values in the image, or where we start to have most of our values, where the bell curve starts. And then on the output, I will lighten a lot till the point that it's like very, 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 like very light, just white, super washed out, overexposed. Because when I set this to darken, I should barely see a difference. I should barely, and even this may be too much. We may even have to like up this, up to here. So, when we're looking in here, especially with these shadows, right, these are pronounced, we can see the difference. And what this is doing again is it's basically stacking in value into there and making it seem like there is shadow baked in, and it's kind of a cool result. And I like that, but I tend to like super contrasty. I'm a big fan of like Skyrim and its super stark textural art style. So I made a style choice, to go pretty contrasty with my ambient occlusion on top of that. So what I will do is I will duplicate this. I'm going to move this over. I'm going to duplicate this out. And I'm going to assign another material. I'm just going to say all maps. All maps, color. Got our ambient occlusion there. And then we'll go back and we will assign our tangent space normal map. And we can see that it already, all we need is maybe a little bit of color variety, right? But it's pretty much, this feels like a final model. And we haven't added any color. This is all just in black and white. And even this, this looks pretty good. It still looks a bit blank. It still looks like it needs a little bit of that textural detail that the baked-in ambient occlusion pass can bring. But even this by itself, I think, is mostly complete. So I would definitely take the time to bake in your ambient occlusion. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and just hook this back up. Because I did one more thing. What I did is I used the multi-cut tool here. And you don't have to do this. But basically, I used the multi-cut tool, and it's this little X-Acto blade, to basically cut into the mesh. And I'm going to go back to wireframe on shaded. But basically, I think it helps out a lot. When I look side by side at these, I was just feeling like it was a little bit flat, and I recommend you do this as well. Even if you have like cobblestone, you want to make a couple stick out a little bit. Is you'd be amazed at just bumping things up a little bit, because normal maps, especially when you get down the barrel of the plane, I like to call it, this starts to really break the illusion. It just looks like an image pasted on, and because the face is like the central interest point, or your eye goes there on this, I wanted to make sure that feels like it's actually sculptural. And so all it is just going in with the multi-cut tool and just cutting around the face. And that's actually, it's not too hard to do. Basically, I can start at a corner and just start going around and just cutting around the silhouette, and then just going through, pressing enter whenever I'm done, and then just clicking again, and then pressing enter, you know, making sure to turn these into quads around the edge. And then I followed around on the inside here, basically kind of like a contour. And all I'm doing is just basically making, it's almost like I did an extrude function, you know, as I'm just making kind of an edge loop around the inside of this to just kind of pull up some of the faces and vertices in here. But the effect, I think the effect is really nice to just bump up that a little bit. And if we had like stone variety in here, or like chunks, then we'd want to go through and use a multi-cut tool to kind of bump up the mesh afterward. Because again, I just think it's these little subtle differences on top and just going the extra mile on polish that really make a large difference, I think, in the final quality. So that is the demo. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or you know, comment via the website. You can contact me through there. But hopefully you found this demo interesting, and hopefully it helps you in how to use Photoshop to edit normal maps and ambient occlusion maps. All right, thank you so much.